So going back about 30 years ago, there was this farmer down in Missouri. He had just bought a large farm, he was running a cattle operation, and while his farming operations weren't paying the bills, he found that he was able to keep things afloat by having a day job in town. Then one day, this farmer got divorced, and his finances went to heck. His life savings were locked up in divorce settlement, he was struggling to cover the cost of the farm, and he held on to his farm just by the skin of his teeth. And the way this guy was farming at the time was kind of the conventional way you ran cattle at the time. You know, he kept them in a big large pasture, he would feed them grain during the winter, he invested a whole heck of a lot of money in infrastructure, and a big part of the way he was operating was a big reason why his farm wasn't profitable. But after coming through the divorce and just barely hanging on to his farm, he realized he needed to make a change in how he farmed. And the changes that he made to his farm were very unconventional at the time. Number one, he focused a lot more of his energy on having rented land versus owned land. Number two, he really focused his energy on really how to be a regenerative farmer, meaning he was looking at practices like mob grazing and soil science and focusing on really having a lot of carbon matter on the ground that he grazed. And he invested a lot of energy in finding the ideal way to have cheap, flexible infrastructure versus a lot of the bigger capital costs that traditional cattle farming would require. And now, 30 years later, this guy is an absolute legend among farmers.
Good day, folks. This is Greg Judy at Green Pastures Farm.
And mark my words, by the end of this video, I am going to track down Greg Judy and I'm going to have a conversation with him. And I'm going to try to convince him to teach me what he knows about raising cattle. Release the Kraken! Loose the goose! As a lot of you guys know, we're planning on adding cattle to our farm this year. I want to go in the neighborhood of somewhere between 6 to 8 cows. My plan would be to rotationally graze them throughout our pastures here on the farm during the spring, summer, fall months. In the winter months, I'll be bale grazing them over there. Yet I've got to admit, I'm a little bit intimidated by the idea of adding cattle to the farm. You know, I don't come from a farming background. I never grew up on a farm. I've been raising ducks and geese and chickens here on our farm for the last 3 years, so I feel like I've built up some basic skills. But overall, I still absolutely am a beginning farmer, and I have a lot to learn. So you guys might be wondering, how am I going to convince this legend of regenerative agriculture to help me out and give me some advice? And well, it was a lot easier than I thought. I just actually looked for his email address on his website and I just wrote him an email saying, hey Greg, would you mind having a half-an-hour Zoom conversation with me so I can talk about my cow plans? And he was just such like a nice and approachable dude. He was just like, sure buddy, how about any of these 3 time slots? And so I probably made this sound like a little bit more of a build-up at the beginning of the video than it really needed to be, because I actually had a chance to hop on a Zoom call with Greg last night.
Hey Greg. Hey Greg, can you hear me?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
And what I did was I basically just took him through my plans for the cattle this year, and I wanted to get his advice and ask him what I might be doing wrong. I first read Greg Judy's book back in the day when I was living in Washington, D.C., and I've been following his YouTube channel for quite a long time. It's probably my favorite channel to watch when I'm just kicking back and trying to enjoy some leisure time.
That's called the soil pond. I'm taking that out. Folks, all that is a mud hole.
So right now on our farm, we only have about 10 acres with a perimeter fence. We put it up last fall to create this habitat for the ducks and geese and chickens. Really, it's ideally situated for growing our permaculture orchard of chestnuts, apples, mulberries, and a whole bunch of other tree types, as well as trying to create a perfect habitat for raising geese. That said, there's still a fair amount of grassland inside this fenced-in area, and so I would be grazing the cows inside of here, but I also know I need to access the acreage that I have on the top of the hill so that I have enough real estate to graze my cows for the full spring, summer, fall months. And so my first question to Greg was, am I crazy for adding the cows before I add the perimeter fence? His feeling was, as long as I can get the cattle comfortable with me and trained to the fencing, and I'm getting docile cows to begin with, I shouldn't have too much of an issue.
It depends on the cows you get. If you get gentle, docile cows that are used to being handled and they know what hot wire is, you'd probably be fine.
You know, one of the bigger projects I'm planning for on the farm this summer is actually putting in about 25 to 30 acres of fencing on the top of our pasture. And even when it comes to that project, I feel like I'm facing a little bit of a dilemma. You know, here on our farm, I have several acres of dense cedar trees here, and they are the perfect fence post size. And so I wasn't sure if I'd be better off to go into the forest, cut down a bunch of trees and use them as fence posts, or look into like a PVC or fiberglass fence post that like someone like Greg is actually a big fan of.
It's gonna cost you a lot of time and a lot of money to use those cedars. Time is money, and you know, my first fences I built, I used a lot of cedar, and I didn't get along very well. You just don't get much done. Your time as fence post is going to save you months and months of cedar work. Takes a lot of work to even dress down one cedar tree to make a decent post out of it.
Right.
And then they'll rot off.
And then you're back to doing it again, 15 years later, probably, right?
Fencing is hard work. Build it once and build it right in your lifetime, and you're done with it.
And I think that that's really sage advice, because generally speaking, when I think about doing work on the farm, I'm realizing more and more that my biggest challenge isn't necessarily money as it is time. You know, I've got a good day job. I do work like making these videos on YouTube, and because I do those things, I have more capital to invest in the farm than say other people who might not be doing those types of activities. The downside for me though is I have like no free time whatsoever. Pretty soon I'll probably end up making one of those day in the life videos, and you'll see sort of what my day-to-day looks like these days.
Stress is stressful.
I actually think that the great time crunch is one of the bigger things that I feel like I underestimated as I was dreaming about farm life when I was living in the city. I thought I would have all the time in the world to tackle all the projects I'd want to do, and the fact is it's been the exact opposite of that.
The breed of cattle I'm thinking about is the Dexter. Do you have an opinion one way or another there?
Yeah, Dexters are great cattle for small homesteads. There's one thing you got to keep in mind though, and that is there is no market for them unless you direct market them yourself.
Mm-hmm.
So don't depend on any local sale barns to give you anything for them. They'll steal them from you. And here's one thing you got to remember, Morgan. When you're in the cattle business, sometimes you're going to have a cow out there that gets thin on you for no reason. I mean, it's not your fault. It's nobody's fault. She just gets thin. And it could be parasites. It could be she's not eating your grass and performing very well. She's out of her environment. That's a cow you better get rid of. And people say, but why don't you just butcher her? You can't butcher that cow. There's no meat on her. And so what you got to remember is your cull cows are a significant portion of your cash flow on your farm.
I'm looking for a smaller breed of cow because of the efficiency. I'm looking for it too because, look, I'm up here right now and there's 4 feet of snow on my pasture. And so It's not like I can stockpile graze. I'm going to have to do hay. And so sort of a smaller cow would be a more efficient cow in my mind. So that's why I went there.
And Dexters are a very easy keeping, smaller frame cow, and you can run more of them. But I just wanted to make you aware of the call value on them. You're going to have cows that fall out of your herd. You just will.
Yep.
You're going to have one that's stupid, one that's not a very good mother. Maybe she's got mastitis. You name it. They lose a calf. They're poor mothers. Those cows need to be taken off your farm.
Another question that I asked Greg was about water and what I should be doing when it comes to watering my cattle.
There's nothing better for flexibility than having pressurized water.
Mhm.
So if you could run a line up that field right down, I'd go right up the middle of it if I could, and put you in some snap couplers, the Plasson, the Plasson, Plasson quick couplers.
Yep.
You could put one of those every couple hundred feet. You've got a water point across your whole farm. That's going to give you tremendous flexibility on your cattle grazing.
So really, for not that much money, it's pretty affordable to be able to run a line all the way up to where I have the cattle, and I can set up the infrastructure with the nice little clamps and hook ends and make it very easy to get the water up to the animals. The system that Greg was telling me about is actually very similar to the one that I've seen at my buddy Zach's sheep farm. In terms of my scheme for moving the cattle and using electrified poly braid to make sure that they're fenced in, he thought it was a fine idea. Greg and I also talked about a lot of other things in terms of cattle movement and what I need to be doing to keep my cows healthy.
The one thing you don't want is you don't want an animal laying in the manure, stepping in their pee. They need to be moved. And if you winter animals in their poop, guess what? You're going to have parasites.
Mhm.
And you're going to have a host of all kinds of unhealthy situations.
So I was thinking of doing like a deep litter bedding method to kind of try to help mitigate that. Do you think that's enough?
No, I think if you stay on top of it and you have enough carbon to lay down to keep them out of their poo, I think that'd be a good workable solution.
Fresh water for the Toby dog. So yeah, I'm really excited about what's going to happen here on our farm this year. These cattle are going to be sort of the next big adventure we have for the farm, and I know I've got a lot to learn, but I think if I keep leveraging the insight and wisdom of folks like Greg Judy, we're going to turn out okay. If you guys want to learn more about Greg and his farm and just kind of get a sense of what he's doing as well as watch some of his videos, I'm going to leave a couple of my favorites right here, as well as a link to his channel so that you guys can subscribe. Be sure to tell him that Toby Dog says hello. Thanks for watching, you guys.